$20. No takers? For a safe that's been sitting in storage for 18 years?
A late bid. $100.
That's Jeremiah Ellison's son, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
He just spent his money on a charred heap of scrap metal.
Sold. $100. As is, no reserve.
Let him haul it out himself. Some people inherit money, others buy junk.
The safe weighed close to 400 pounds and looked like something dragged out of a fire. Because it was. The exterior was warped, the dial fused, the door sealed shut for 18 years. Nobody at the Belhaven Freight Depot wanted it. The auctioneer started at $20 and heard nothing but silence. Then a 17-year-old boy raised his hand. He offered everything he had saved, $100. The woman who laughed loudest also signed the paperwork that transferred ownership without a single reservation. What she didn't ask was the only question that mattered. What was still locked inside? If you're someone who has ever been laughed at for seeing something others couldn't, this story is for you. Stay with it to the end, and if you find yourself nodding along, consider subscribing. New stories go up every week, and every single one of them is about people who refused to be what the world decided they were. Nobody offered to help him load it onto the dolly. The men at Belhaven Freight Depot watched Micah wrestle the safe toward the exit with the same mild interest they might give a stray dog dragging a bone across a parking lot. A few of them were still smiling from Monica Pembroke's joke. One of them recorded it on his phone and uploaded it before Micah had even cleared the doorway. By the time he had the safe strapped down in the bed of Gordon's borrowed truck, the clip had already been shared to 3 different local Facebook groups under variations of the same caption. Jeremiah Ellison's kid just paid $100 for a piece of junk. The apple doesn't fall far. Micah drove back to Cedar Avenue with the windows down, the August heat sitting heavy on his arms, the weight of the safe shifting slightly on every turn. He had cleared out his savings account that morning, every dollar from 3 years of weekend work and after-school shifts, because he had seen the auction listing 2 days earlier and recognized the photograph immediately. The logo etched into the lower corner, the year stamped on the back panel. He hadn't told Gordon what he was planning to do, but in those 2 days of preparation, he had done more than just arrange the money. He had looked up every piece of public writing he could find about the Ashcroft Grand Development Project, and one name kept appearing in the bylines: Dana Whitfield, a local reporter who had spent the better part of a year covering the community pushback against the Pembroke project. He saved her number without knowing exactly when he would use it. Cedar Avenue in the late afternoon had its own particular smell: motor oil, old wood, and the kind of heat that rises off concrete and doesn't go anywhere. Pike Lock and Key sat between a dry cleaner and a boarded-up phone repair shop. Its hand-painted sign sun-faded to the point where the K in Key looked more like an H. Gordon Pike had run the shop for nearly 40 years. He had taken Micah in when Micah was 9, and his grandmother's health made it impossible for her to keep up with an active boy alone. Nobody had used the word guardian. They had just agreed, quietly, that Micah would sleep in the room above the shop and be useful, and Gordon would feed him and teach him whatever Micah was willing to learn. What Micah turned out to be willing to learn was everything. Gordon had a saying he repeated often in those early years, usually when he was testing whether an apprentice had real instinct or just a good memory. A lock doesn't hide what's inside. It hides what you don't know how to listen for. He said Micah had taken to that idea faster than anyone he had ever taught. Within a year, the boy could identify a binding pin by touch alone. Within 2, he could work a 5-disc padlock in under 40 seconds without a pick. Gordon called it having the ears of a true locksmith. He never said where that kind of talent usually comes from. Whenever Micah pressed him on it, asked whether his father might have been the same way, Gordon found something else that needed his attention. Jeremiah Ellison had died 18 years earlier in the fire that gutted the Ashcroft Grand Hotel when Micah was still an infant. What survived him in Belhaven wasn't a reputation or a memory so much as a story. One that had been told so many times and in so many living rooms and barbershops and church parking lots that most people in town had stopped thinking of it as a story at all. They treated it as settled fact. Jeremiah Ellison had gone back into the burning building to steal from the owner's safe, and he had not made it out. There was no direct evidence of this. There had been no trial, no formal investigation, no testimony that placed him in the room where the safe was kept. But there had been no one willing to say otherwise, and in a small town, silence functions like a signature. It confirms what people already want to believe. Micah had grown up inside that story the way a tree grows around a fence post. It didn't define him exactly, but it was always there, pressing into him from one side, shaping the direction he leaned. He pulled the truck to the back of the shop and cut the engine. Gordon came out of the side door with a rag in his hand and squinted at the truck bed. He looked at the safe for a long moment without speaking. Micah climbed down and waited, watching the old man's face. Gordon had spent enough years around locks and safes that his expressions when he encountered one were often more informative than his words. A slight tightening around the eyes could mean recognition. A slow exhale could mean calculation. What crossed his face now was neither of those things. It was something quieter and more complicated. The kind of expression a person wears when something they have been trying not to think about is suddenly standing in their driveway. Gordon set the rag down on the fender of the truck. He walked around to the side of the safe and looked at the manufacturer's plate, still partially legible through the burn damage. He looked at the warped dial, the caved corner of the door, the year stamped above the hinge. Then he looked at Micah. "Your father worked on this safe," Gordon said. Micah had imagined a lot of different things Gordon might say when he saw it. He had not imagined that. He asked Gordon what he meant. Gordon was quiet long enough that Micah asked again. The old man pulled the safe off the truck himself, moving it with the practiced ease of someone who has spent decades handling things heavier than they looked, and got it through the back door and into the main workshop before he answered. What Gordon said was this. He had known Jeremiah Ellison for years before the fire, and Jeremiah had not been only a maintenance worker at the Ashcroft Grand. That was the job title on his paycheck, but titles at the Ashcroft had always been flexible. Eleanor Ashcroft, who owned the hotel, had learned within the first year of Jeremiah's employment that he had a skill set that went well beyond changing light fixtures and fixing plumbing. She had started calling on him for things that required discretion. Lock repairs, safe maintenance, situations where she needed someone who could work quietly and not discuss it afterward. Gordon had taught Jeremiah everything he knew about safes, years before Micah was born. He said it plain and without decoration. The reason Micah had this ability was because his father had it first. Micah stood very still. He had asked Gordon about his father hundreds of times over the years and received some version of the same answer. Jeremiah was a good man. It was a long time ago. Some things don't help anyone to talk about. This was the first time Gordon had said anything that connected Jeremiah to a specific skill, a specific place, a specific object. And the object was currently sitting in the middle of the workshop on 4 rubber feet, its burned door facing the light. He asked Gordon to tell him the rest. Gordon sat down on the stool next to his workbench. He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he said there were people in this town who had benefited for a long time from the story that circulated about Jeremiah, and those people still had money and still had lawyers, and he was not a young man. Micah told him he understood all of that. Gordon looked at him, really looked at him, the way he did when he was deciding whether a lock mechanism was worth attempting or whether it was too far gone. And then he said what he had kept back. "If you open that," Gordon said, "there are people who are not going to like what you find." He did not name the people. He did not say what Micah would find. He stood up, walked to the door of the workshop, and told Micah he was going upstairs to make coffee, and that whatever Micah decided to do with the rest of the night was his own business. The shop went quiet. Micah stood alone with the safe. He thought about the clip that was probably still spreading online. The CEO of the largest hospitality company in the county laughing at him in front of a crowd. The smiling faces. The low hum of group amusement that runs through a room when everyone has agreed on who the joke is about. He thought about the money he had spent, which was not a small amount for him. He thought about Gordon's face when he first saw the safe in the truck bed. That particular expression that was not quite recognition and not quite fear, but lived somewhere between the two. He thought about the year stamped on the back panel. His father had touched this safe. His father had been trusted with this safe. His father had died inside the building where this safe had lived for nearly 2 decades of questions and silence. And now it was here, in the workshop on Cedar Avenue, in the shop where Micah had learned everything he knew about how locks worked. Because Gordon had taught him the same way he had apparently once taught his father. Micah went to the supply cabinet and got his tools. He laid them out on the mat next to the safe in the order he always used. Tension wrenches by size, picks arranged by profile, the small flashlight with the angled head, the stethoscope he used for older dial mechanisms. He pulled on his work gloves and then thought better of it and took them off. For a safe this old and this damaged, he would need his fingertips. He would need to feel every vibration the dial gave him, every false signal and every real one, every small communication. The mechanism was still capable of making after 18 years of silence in a storage room. He turned the main light on above the safe. He thought about Gordon's warning one more time. He thought about a boy, a man actually, a grown man with a specific and serious skill, walking back into a burning building and not walking out again. He thought about how that man's son had just spent every dollar he had saved to bring the thing that might explain why to a workshop on Cedar Avenue. He pressed his fingertips to the dial. He started to listen. The first hour taught Micah why no one had opened it in 18 years. I had worked on damaged locks before. Old padlocks swollen from moisture, cabinet locks where the keyway had been forced and bent, car door mechanisms that had survived collisions and barely functioned afterward. He understood the basic principle. Heat changes metal at the molecular level, and what fire does to a precision lock mechanism is roughly what a hammer does to a watch. The individual components survive technically, but the relationships between them are destroyed. The tolerances that make the whole thing work, the fractions of a millimeter that allow each disc to seat cleanly against the next, those are gone. What remains is functional in appearance only. What he had not anticipated was how thoroughly this particular safe had been cooked. The fire at the Ashcroft Grand had burned hot and long enough to warp the outer casing, and that warping had compressed the internal mechanism in ways that were not immediately visible. When Micah applied tension to the dial, he felt not the clean resistance of a functioning lock, but something closer to static. Dozens of small vibrations all arriving at once, none of them clearly meaningful. the way a conversation sounds when 6 people are talking in the same room at the same volume. His usual method depended on being able to isolate signals. Here, there was almost nothing to isolate. He worked methodically, starting from first principles. He reduced his tension to the minimum he could sustain and moved the dial 1 degree at a time, stopping after each increment to hold his breath and feel. The first disc gave itself up after roughly 40 minutes, a faint but real change in resistance at a position that was 12 degrees off from where it would have landed on an undamaged mechanism. He marked it with a piece of painter's tape on the outer rim and moved on. The second disc took another 30 minutes. Both of his index fingers had started to sting at the tips, the skin slightly raw from the sustained contact with the rough, fire-damaged dial surface. Gordon came down from upstairs at some point and set a mug of coffee on the workbench without a word. He settled into his chair in the corner of the workshop with a book he didn't appear to be reading. And Micah didn't say anything to him either. The silence between them was the comfortable kind. The kind built from years of working in the same room on different problems, each of them trusting the other to be present without requiring conversation. The third disc was more difficult. The compression of the casing had pushed it slightly out of plane, meaning it didn't rotate in a perfectly flat circle the way it was designed to. It wobbled by a fraction of a degree on every rotation, and that wobble generated its own vibration, which layered over the binding signal Micah was trying to find. He spent nearly an hour on it before he found a way to read past the wobble, by moving the dial faster than he normally would and listening for the change in frequency rather than the change in resistance. It was an approach Gordon had mentioned once in passing, years ago, as something a locksmith in Atlanta had used on a water-damaged vault. Micah had filed it away without knowing when he would need it. I was on the fourth disc, deep in concentration, when headlights swept across the front window of the shop. It was close to midnight. Cedar Avenue didn't get much traffic after 9. Micah kept his fingers on the dial and listened to the sound of a car door closing. One door, no others. And then footsteps on the wooden porch. Not hesitant footsteps, the kind that belong to someone who has already decided they have the right to be wherever they are going. The knock, when it came, was 3 sharp raps. Gordon was out of his chair before Micah could move. The man who came through the door was somewhere in his mid-50s, with the kind of permanent tan that comes from a lifetime of outdoor lunches rather than outdoor work, dressed in a jacket that cost more than Micah's monthly food budget. He introduced himself as Travis Kincaid, Senior Legal Counsel for Pembroke Crown Hospitality, with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to introductions being the end of the social portion of any meeting. He looked at the safe. He looked at Micah. He set an envelope on the workbench. Inside the envelope was a cashier's check for $5,000 made out to Micah Ellison. Travis explained that there had been a clerical error in the auction inventory. The safe had been included in the lot without proper authorization, and the company was prepared to remedy the situation immediately. He spoke in the tone of a man presenting an obviously reasonable solution to an obviously simple problem. And he watched Micah's face the way people watch a door they expect to open on the first try. Micah looked at the check for a moment. He thought about the arithmetic. $5,000 for something the company had just sold him for $100. That was a 50-to-1 return on a transaction they had publicly mocked him for. He asked Travis why a corporation worth hundreds of millions of dollars would offer 50 times the market value for something they had dismissed 4 hours ago as worthless. Travis said it was a matter of inventory accuracy, not valuation. Micah told him he wasn't interested. Travis reached into his jacket and produced a second envelope. He set it next to the first and said the offer was time-sensitive. The figure inside was $10,000. Micah's hands were still at his sides. He told Travis the answer was the same. Something shifted in Travis's expression. Not quite frustration, more like a recalibration. He put both envelopes back in his jacket and produced instead a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. He unfolded it and placed it flat on the workbench under the light. It was a formal legal notice, dense with language. Micah could parse well enough to understand the core of it. Pembroke Crown Hospitality was asserting a claim of disputed ownership over the contents of the safe on the grounds that the auction documentation had not explicitly conveyed rights to internal property of unknown nature, and any interference with those contents prior to resolution of the dispute could constitute civil conversion under Georgia law. Travis gave Micah a moment to read it. Then he said that Monica Pembroke would be contacting him at 6 in the morning to discuss a resolution, and that the company's legal team would be filing the necessary paperwork with Belhaven County Court when it opened at 8. Micah understood what he was actually being told. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a countdown. If the safe was not open before 6, the company would use the legal system to take it back, and whatever was inside would disappear into a process that Micah had no money and no lawyers to fight. Travis left the way he had arrived, efficiently, without apparent concern. And the sound of the car pulling away from the curb left a particular kind of silence behind it. Gordon closed the front door and stood with his back to it. Micah looked at the safe, then at Gordon. He said, "Tell me the rest." Gordon had kept one version of the truth available for 18 years. That Jeremiah had worked on the safe, that the safe was connected to the night of the fire, that there were powerful people in Belhaven who had reason to prefer the existing story. That version was true as far as it went. It just didn't go far enough. What Gordon told him now was the part he had been protecting by omission. Eleanor Ashcroft, in the final months before the fire, had discovered that a development company was systematically dismantling her ownership of the hotel through fraudulent debt instruments and forged transfer documents, pressuring her toward a sale at a fraction of the property's value by manufacturing a financial crisis that appeared on paper to be her own doing. She had gone to her lawyers and found that at least 2 of them had connections to the same company. She had gone to her bank and found that several accounts had already been flagged in ways she hadn't authorized. By the time she understood the scope of what was being done to her, she didn't trust any of the official channels she would normally have used to fight it. The one person she trusted was Jeremiah Ellison. She trusted him because he had worked for her for 11 years and had never once used anything he knew about the hotel or its operations for his own benefit, at a time when he easily could have. She asked him to change the combination on the main safe and to help her seal inside it the evidence she had collected: documents, account records, proof of the fraudulent transactions, along with a portion of her liquid assets that she didn't want accessible to the people who were trying to take her property. Jeremiah did this on the afternoon before the fire. Gordon knew because Jeremiah had called him that evening, not to explain everything, but to say that he had done something important for someone who deserved better than what was happening to her, and that he was glad he had done it. The fire broke out that night. Eleanor died. Jeremiah also died. The story that circulated afterward, that Jeremiah had gone back in to steal, appeared within days, carried by people who had every reason to want that version of events to be the one that stuck. Micah asked the question he had been moving toward since the auction. He said the name, Pembroke. Gordon looked at him for a long time. He didn't say yes. He didn't need to. The thing that hit Micah hardest in that moment wasn't the revelation about the company. It was the reversal of the story he had lived inside his entire life. He had grown up believing his father was a man who had died doing something shameful. Now he was being told that his father had died doing something that required more integrity than most people are ever called upon to show. That he had been trusted with a secret, had kept it, and had gone back into a burning building not to take something, but to protect it. Micah went back to the safe. It was past 1 in the morning. He had the 4th and 5th discs remaining, and the 5th was worse than anything he had encountered so far. It had been partially fused to the drive shaft by the heat. It still moved, but only within a fraction of its normal arc. And within that range, it generated so much interference that Micah could barely distinguish any signal at all. He tried his standard approach. He tried the frequency method. He tried reducing his tension to almost nothing. An hour passed. The coffee on the workbench went cold. At some point, Micah became aware that the eastern sky visible through the high window above the door had not yet begun to lighten, but would. Travis's legal team would be at the courthouse in less than 5 hours. He thought about the laughter at the auction. He thought about a crowd of people who had looked at the same object and seen nothing worth their time. He thought about the signature at the bottom of the auction receipt and what that signature had meant to Monica when she put it there and what it was going to mean to her by morning. He rested his forehead against the cold metal of the door. For a moment, just a moment, he let himself believe that perhaps the safe would win, that after everything, the thing his father had died protecting would stay sealed, and the story would stay the way it had always been. Then, from somewhere in the accumulated years of working beside Gordon Pike, a sentence surfaced. A good locksmith doesn't force a lock to talk. He stays quiet long enough to hear it. Micah lifted his head. He took his hands off the dial and held them at his sides for 30 seconds, letting the blood return to his fingertips, letting the tension in his wrists go. Then he set 2 fingers, not 4, just 2, on the dial with the lightest possible contact. Not enough to turn it, barely enough to feel it. He waited. Under his fingertips, so faint it was almost imaginary, there was a vibration. Not the interference pattern, not the wobble, something directional. The disc was not fully fused. It had a range of movement so small that hours of standard technique had not found it, but it was there. Micah reduced his tension on the spindle and applied the lightest possible counter-rotation to the dial, opposite to the direction he had been working. Once, nothing. Twice, nothing. Third time. The vibration under his fingertips shifted. The disc caught. A sound moved through the body of the safe, quiet and clean and unmistakable. Click. Micah put his hand on the handle. He pulled down. The burned door, 4 inches of fire-warped steel sealed shut for 18 years, swung open toward him. The light from the workshop lamp fell directly into the open safe, and for a moment, Micah simply looked. He had told himself, in the hours of working, that he was prepared for anything. For empty space, for water-damaged paper, for something so deteriorated that it would be impossible to read or identify. What he was not prepared for was gold. Actual gold. In the form of old coins stacked in cloth rolls, their surfaces catching the lamplight with a warmth that seemed wrong in the middle of the night in a locksmith's workshop on Cedar Avenue. Around the coins were sealed bundles of currency, banded and intact, their condition suggesting they had been placed inside before the fire rather than surviving it by luck. Behind those were folders of documents, account records, transfer certificates, a ledger with handwritten entries running down column after column in a tight, precise hand. A small hinged jewelry box sat to one side, its latch undamaged. And in the back corner, upright against the interior wall, was a sealed envelope. Micah did not touch anything immediately. He stood at the open door and looked at all of it with the same discipline he used when he opened a lock for the first time. Take in the whole picture before you disturb any part of it. Gordon had come up behind him and stood at his shoulder, and Micah heard the old man exhale slowly through his nose, the sound of someone seeing something they had been trying to imagine for a very long time. The total value of what sat in that safe, as determined weeks later by independent appraisers, came to just over $3 million. But that was not the first thing Micah reached for. He reached into the corner and picked up a small hinged box separate from the jewelry case. Older, plainer, with no latch at all, just a friction-fit lid. Inside, on a piece of cotton that had yellowed with age, were locksmith tools, picks and tension wrenches in a set Micah recognized as being at least 2 decades old, their handles worn smooth in the way that only comes from years of daily use. He turned one of them over in his hand. On the handle, in letters pressed into the metal rather than painted or scratched, the kind of marking a craftsman makes when he wants it to last, were 2 initials, J.E. Micah set the tool down on his knee and stayed there for a moment, crouched in front of the open safe, holding a dead man's work in his hands. His father had not just changed the combination, he had locked the safe with his own tools and left them inside. Not as a signature, exactly, more like a statement of intent, evidence that he had been here, done this deliberately, and was not trying to hide that fact from whoever would eventually find it. Gordon, reading the initials from where he stood, said nothing. There was nothing to add. Micah opened the sealed envelope last. The letter inside was 3 pages, handwritten, dated 2 days before the fire. Eleanor Ashcroft's handwriting was formal and unhurried, the writing of someone who had been educated at a time when penmanship was considered a reflection of character. She explained what had been done to her, the false debt instruments introduced through a subsidiary she hadn't known was connected to a development company called Vantage Meridian Partners, the forged transfer documents filed with the county clerk's office using her signature, the lawyers who had been on retainer with Vantage Meridian throughout. She named figures and account numbers and dates with the precision of someone who knew their documentation would need to stand on its own. She wrote that she had converted a portion of her liquid assets into currency, certificates, and gold, and had placed them in the safe along with the full record of what had been done to her. She had established a private trust with a Savannah attorney she trusted, with instructions that the money be used for the families of her hotel staff and for children in Belhaven who needed access to trade education and apprenticeship. She wrote that she was making this record because she wanted there to be something that could not simply be made to disappear. On a separate page at the back, written in a slightly different ink, as though added later the same day, was a short addendum. Eleanor had written that the man who had changed the combination and sealed the safe had done so out of loyalty and at considerable personal risk, and that he should be recognized for it. She named him directly, Jeremiah Ellison, maintenance supervisor, employed at the Ashcroft Grand for 11 years. She directed that a specific portion of the trust be held for Jeremiah or his surviving descendants in recognition of his integrity and service. Micah read that paragraph 3 times. He read it the way you read something when the words are simple and clear, and you still need to go over them again because your mind keeps trying to find a version of them that would be less significant. His father had not gone back into the burning building to steal. He had gone back because the safe was there, and the safe contained the only evidence that could prove what had been done to Eleanor Ashcroft, and he had locked it himself and knew exactly what it held. What Jeremiah had understood, in the minutes when the building was burning and the decision had to be made, was that if the safe survived and was eventually opened by the right person, the truth would survive with it. The eastern sky was beginning to pale. Micah picked up his phone and called Dana Whitfield. She answered on the second ring. He told her where he was, what he had found, and that if she wanted to be present when things happened this morning, she should be on Cedar Avenue before 5:30. Dana Whitfield was outside the shop at 5:22. Monica Pembroke arrived at 6 o'clock exactly, not by phone, as Travis had indicated the night before, but in person, with two lawyers Micah didn't recognize. She had decided, apparently, that whatever was in this safe required her to be in the room. She came through the front door of Pike Lock and Key the way she signed paperwork at the auction. Without looking at anyone else first, her attention going directly to the open safe and what was arranged on the workbench beside it. Her expression went through several adjustments in the space of about 3 seconds, and what settled on her face was calculation. She was looking at the documents and the coins and the ledger and the jewelry box, and she was running numbers, and whatever sum she arrived at was large enough to change how she held herself. She said, with the measured calm of a person who has had attorneys beside her in difficult rooms many times, that the safe was company property, and its contents fell under the same ownership. Whatever had been placed inside it before the fire was part of the hotel's estate, and the estate had been legally acquired by Pembroke Crown Hospitality through a properly documented transaction. Micah took the auction receipt from his shirt pocket and held it out flat between them. The receipt said everything it needed to say. One burned safe, sold as is, contents unknown, no reserve, authorized signature at the bottom. Monica had signed it herself. Whatever was in the safe at the moment of sale had become his property at the moment she put her name on that line, willingly, in public, in front of an audience, while laughing. One of Monica's lawyers began to say something about the distinction between the physical safe and its contents, about the ambiguity of transfer language, about a possible court order to establish chain of custody. Gordon walked in from the back of the shop. I was carrying his own work ledger. Not one of Eleanor's, but his personal record of every job he had performed going back decades, maintained in the obsessive detail of a man who treated every task as worth documenting. He opened it to a specific page and set it on the workbench next to the auction receipt. The entry was dated the afternoon before the fire at the Ashcroft Grand Hotel. It recorded a safe combination replacement, the model and serial number, which matched the plate on the safe standing open in the workshop, and the name of the employee who had carried out the work. Jeremiah Ellison, working under Gordon's instruction and authorization. Gordon had been there. He had given Jeremiah the combination protocol. He had watched him seal the door. Gordon told Monica's lawyers that he had kept his mouth shut for 18 years because he had been afraid, and that he was done being afraid, and that everything in Eleanor's letter was consistent with what he had personally witnessed. Monica looked at the receipt. She looked at Gordon's ledger. She looked at Eleanor's letter. Then she looked at Micah. At the 17-year-old boy she had mocked in front of a crowd the previous afternoon. She said, "You're a minor with no legal representation. What exactly do you think you're going to do with all of this?" Micah looked at her steadily. His hands were at his sides. His voice was even and quiet. "I don't have to do anything with it. It already says everything." Dana Whitfield, standing in the doorway with her recorder running, got all of it. What followed moved faster than Micah had expected. The documents went to Belhaven County Court that morning. The Savannah attorney Eleanor had named, whose firm had maintained the trust records in sealed storage for 18 years, waiting for an authenticated copy of Eleanor's letter to trigger administration, was reached by afternoon. The trust was real, properly filed, and had been sitting dormant for lack of that single document, The investigation that followed established that Vantage Meridian Partners, named in Eleanor's records, had been absorbed into the Pembroke corporate structure during the reorganization after the Ashcroft fire. Monica had not been personally involved in what happened 18 years ago. She had been building her career in Atlanta at the time. But the company she now ran had been built in significant part on assets acquired through fraud. The board of Pembroke Crown Hospitality ordered an independent audit. The Ashcroft development project was suspended. A portion of the land was transferred to Eleanor's trust for its original purposes. Travis Kincaid, whose legal notice to Micah had been documented and witnessed by Gordon, was investigated separately for his conduct that night. He resigned before the audit concluded. Gordon gave a full public statement. He said he had known the truth and had not spoken it, and that this was something he would carry regardless of how things resolved, because the time he had stayed silent was time that Jeremiah Ellison's son had spent growing up under a false story. There was no clean resolution to that part of it, and Gordon did not try to make one. The trust was administered according to Eleanor's instructions. Scholarships were established for trade apprenticeships. A community learning center was built in Belhaven, its construction funded in part by Eleanor's assets. The portion reserved for Jeremiah's descendants was confirmed as legally belonging to Micah, and he used it to secure stable housing, finish school, and help Gordon keep the shop on Cedar Avenue running. What remained, he put into a fund he named himself, the Jeremiah Ellison Trade Scholarship, for children in Belhaven who had the ability and the discipline to learn a skilled trade, but not the money to start. When a reporter asked Monica Pembroke, in front of a camera outside the courthouse, whether she still believed Micah had wasted his money on garbage, she looked at him for a long moment without answering. It was not the look of a woman who had run out of words. It was the look of a woman doing the arithmetic on what one burned safe, sold at a liquidation auction she had personally authorized, had ultimately cost her. The safe stayed at Pike Lock and Key for a while, and then Micah moved it to the new learning center, where it stood in the front hallway with the door held open by a small rubber stop. No one restored the exterior. The burns and the warped metal and the fused dial were left exactly as they were. A small card mounted on the wall next to it said only, "Purchased for $100. There was no explanation of what had been inside. Anyone who walked in could see the card and form their own question. That was the point. Years later, Micah kept 2 sets of tools on his workbench, his own and his father's, the old set with the worn handles and the initials pressed into the metal. In the top drawer, between a notebook and a box of spare pins, was a receipt. $100. One burned safe. No reserve. He kept it not as a reminder of what he had found inside. He kept it as a reminder of the room full of people who had looked at the same object and seen nothing worth having, and of the one signature at the bottom of the page that had made all of it possible. Monica Pembroke looked at that safe and asked one question: what is it worth? Micah looked at it and asked a different one: what is it holding? That difference between a person who measures value and a person who searches for it is what this entire story came down to. Micah didn't win because he was smarter or luckier or better connected. He won because he was willing to sit in a cold workshop at 2 in the morning, with bleeding fingertips and a countdown ticking, and keep listening after everyone else had already decided there was nothing to hear. If there is something in your life that other people have written off as worthless, a skill, a path, a question you can't stop asking, don't let their certainty become yours. The people who laugh loudest at what you're carrying are usually the ones who never thought to look inside it. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel. Every week there's a new one, and every single one of them is about what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept the version of themselves the world decided on. We'll see you in the next story.